welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Very nice to be here, Andre.
Thank
Our
you.
pleasure.
I want to start right out with because this show and this channel that we have is very much dedicated to the arts in Asheville, the creative spirit in Asheville. I'd like you to just both reflect a little bit on what it's like, your first visit in Asheville, the creativity, the music. Tell us a little bit about your visit.
Well, very surprised to find in the middle of the South in North Carolina here, the mountains here, to find the amount of culture that's here, the artistic. It's obviously a university town, college town, and it's really was very surprising to me and refreshing to come out of sort of redneck area into this bastion of absolutely beautiful people and a lot of talent. We noticed street musicians, buskers that were really good. They were playing like country music, but it was really good country music. We really enjoyed it. And there seems to be a spirit here which I didn't expect. I was thinking, Moogfest, there'll be a few people, maybe a few 500, something like that. The whole town is Moogfest. I couldn't believe it. We walk in there, and they've got the streets closed up. The main street, Broadway is. It was just a mind blower for me. I had absolutely no idea that this was going on, but also the gratification that it gave me to find so many people into the type of music that 40 years ago, when Bob Moog first brought out the synthesizer that became the first synthesizer that was really usable by ordinary people and available, from that time when there were maybe half a dozen of us, now it's like there's musicians, there's synthesizers, the place is packed. I can't believe it. It's absolutely phenomenal. It makes my heart glad.
Wow.
Everybody's on the synthesizer down here.
You tell us.
Man, everyone's on the synthesizer. Everyone plays something electronic, something for the future. Man, this is really off the chain down here. Now, also, I came down here for the first time, like, almost 40 years ago. So,
on a tour?
Yeah.
Who were you on tour with?
I used to play with this Motown singing group. I won't even name them. But we used to play all the venues here, like opening acts and doing the Orange Peel is the place that I remember the most. And last night we went to see the groups there. Man, that place didn't have a floor in it when we played in it. It was a dirt floor.
Wow.
So now to see the people down here and the way that they embrace the music, and then we go around, people talking about the artists that we've worked with. Of course they know who's Malcolm's, all the stuff, but as soon as you say Gil and they go, hey, I do know you guy or something, or the music y'all did was beautiful. It's beautiful, man. It's really nice. It's warm down here, finally.
That's fantastic. No, I'm very happy that you got a great day of weather, because we had a little rain. The weather is beautiful here. We're 2,100 feet above sea level, and on average, and great weather. We're actually in a temperate rainforest.
Really?
We get enough rain. We had the second most rain in the United States of America last year in July. Hilo, Hawaii was number one.
Really? What happened? What happened to Washington State?
They got a lot of rain, but that's how much rain we got last year. It was unbelievable. We are a rainforest by the technical definition. The amount of flora and fauna, and so I do hope you come back and enjoy it some more.
Yeah, we noticed how green it was here and how beautiful. Yeah. It was like, it's remarkably beautiful here. I mean, stunningly so.
Yeah.
Now that's a great snapshot to hear from you gentlemen. So welcome.
Thank you.
I want to jump into a few things, and we're going to jump around a little bit, but I want to talk about how you both started in music, of course. But let me jump right to kind of a nexus that brings you to this place here. Of course, you both have done a lot of jazz playing. You're both bass players, actually, so there's a lot of different parallels. But Malcolm, you were speaking yesterday about playing jazz in London and in the late 40s, 50s, and early 60s. But I want to just jump for a minute, since we're at this electronic festival. Talk to us a little bit about late 60s, early 70s, when you were working with synthesizers and you formed the Tonto's Expanding Headband Project. Tell us a little bit about synthesizers, how you got into that.
Well, it was very interesting. I came to America by way of South Africa and long trip across the Pacific, which I won't bore you with the details, but basically, because it was 1968, and it was because of the Six-Day War, where the Suez Canal, they sunk all the ships in the Suez Canal. I was supposed to go by ship because it had 2 bases, a cello, a trunk of stuff and everything. Wow. And I was trying to flee from apartheid Africa, where they were trying to put me in jail next to Mandela on Robben Island for putting on mixed race concerts.
Right.
And I just got out by the skin of my teeth with the help of Afrikaner speaking, a white Afrikaans speaking bass playing student of mine who hid me out, and I was a fugitive, front page of the papers and everything, and he hid me out and smuggled me out through Mozambique, where I got on this ship. After it took me about 6 weeks to find the ship that was going to America, and officially we were supposed to go up. It was a cargo ship with 12 passenger berths, and the other 11 passenger berths were filled with couples in their retirement doing their round the world trip. And in the 12th cabin there was this 92-year-old ex-town clerk from Santa Barbara. Wow. And me. Wow. Oldest and the youngest on board. I was 30 at the time, so by far. And we got on like a house on fire, the two of us. Great. So we had a great time. He was the best shuffleboard player I ever met. Anyhow, he had been going on the boats since he had retired at 65. He said it was a lot cheaper than retiring in the States. So he'd been traveling around, and every port we went into, he knew all the people, and so it was great fun to be around him. And he was a very interesting guy. But what happened was we were supposed to go up the east coast of Africa, stopping at various ports to load. There's a cargo ship after all. And while they were loading, these couples would go off and do a safari and come back. You know, this was the whole trip. That was the reason that they were on it. I was just trying to get to the States.
Right.
And we got up as far as Ethiopia, Assab in Ethiopia, up the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. And we're waiting there, and they don't have any cranes or anything in these African ports. Mm-hmm. Everything is loaded by men, right. Manpower. Excuse me. Everything is loaded by hand, by men, teams of men, and they sing these songs, works like to keep them in because they're carrying heavy stuff, and they all work together like little groups, and they're all singing as they go. It was very, very interesting. Well, anyway, we loaded up on the 3rd day, and then we're sitting there the 4th day, nothing's happening, and I'm thinking, well, why aren't we leaving? You know, and the 5th day, still nothing happens. So I go chatting to the officers, and they're very cagey about what's going on. And of course, we didn't have any news. There wasn't any internet back then. There wasn't any radio really that we could understand, because we're in Ethiopia. Right. We can't get any British English-speaking radio there. It was too far away in the middle of nowhere. So eventually, we got told what was going on about the Six-Day War and how the Suez Canal was blocked. So we couldn't go up the Suez Canal, and they were waiting for to be rerouted, and what to do from Holland, because the ship was a Dutch ship with Dutch officers, but with an all-Chinese crew from Hong Kong. So the word came down that the route had been changed. We were now going to head out over the Pacific, and instead of going up through the Suez Canal, Mediterranean, Straits of Gibraltar, Atlantic, New York, we were going to go Seychelles Islands, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, West Coast, Asia, right? San Francisco. So I get rerouted to San Francisco. Well, the whole trip from beginning to end, from the time I got on the boat, was 3 months. Wow. And it was fantastic. We crossed the Pacific, and I arrived in California. And I tried to get work, as a bass player, and of course, I hadn't got a green card. I came in as a visitor.
And what year is this?
This is 1968.
68, okay.
And I come in as a visitor, and I've got 2 basses, a cello, and what do you mean you visit? Oh, I'm on my way to Canada. Right. And I want to see America before I do. So they gave me a 3-month visa. And to cut to the chase, I tried to get into, I went down to Los Angeles, where I knew some musician friends who I'd worked with in Africa, with Leni Kazan, Lloyd Morales, and Peter Davis, her conductor, and it was a very interesting relationship. Lloyd invited me to come down and stay with him in Los Angeles, so I did that, and he got me hooked up with Pat Boone studio, because we discovered I couldn't work I didn't have a green card, so I
Just
couldn't
legally,
work. So
right.
legally, so, and a jazz player, you can't work under somebody else's name.
Sure.
But Lloyd had found this guy called Cecil Smythe in
Right.
who he knew, who's like an 85-year-old bass player in Local 47, who wasn't playing anymore, and Lloyd knew him, and he called him up and told him the situation. He said, could Malcolm use your card, because his name is Cecil. So it was like Cecil Smythe.
Sure.
So it was close enough that I could
why
say
not?
Malcolm Cecil Smythe. Malcolm Cecil is my stage name.
Yeah.
And here's my card, Cecil Smythe is my real name. You know?
Yes.
And there's no picture on it, right? So, so I got away with it. And I toured for the first year with Laney Kazan. And to cut a long story short, there were 3 attempts to get me into the country, each of which got harder as we went on, because it was to do with the Civil Rights Act coming in.
Sure.
No longer a British quota. Now I'm in line behind everybody coming up from Mexico and everybody coming in from the Orient.
Right,
And,
right.
you know, the line's 20,000 long.
Sure.
And I'm just 20,001.
Right.
And sorry, no go. So I ended up having to go to New York. And I had built the first 16-track studio in Los Angeles for Pat Boone, because his manager, Jack Spina, realized my technical capabilities, because I've been in the Air Force for 4 years and was thoroughly conversant with technical things. I'd had my own electronics consultancy business in England prior to that. So I was, you know, that was something I could do. And I ended up getting a job, being offered a job at the record plant for a 6-week stint. And the job was very peculiar. My job was to go in there and fix stuff that the engineers had purposely broken. And the reason they'd purposely broken it was because the record plant in New York was going to be sold to a company called TVI, who was a public company.
Okay.
Now, they had, obviously the public company had to be a union shop. Now, none of the engineers working at the record plant were union engineers. And the word got out that the place was going to be sold, and they were all going to get fired.
Right.
But there was a caveat to this, which was that all the equipment had to be in working order.
Oh.
So the guys were breaking the equipment every night. They knew what they were doing. They knew they could put it back, reverse whatever they did. But and the maintenance guy who was on there couldn't keep up with it. He was just he was like razzled by it, and he just left. So I was offered this 6-week stint, and the caveat for me was they would sign my immigration papers. Record plant would sponsor me. Now this is when it was sold, it would be Record Plant Public Company sponsoring me. Now they got more clout than Pat Boone and Laney Kazan had. This is public company. Oh yeah, must be all right. And of course they covered all the bases about offering me the right sort of money, so on and so on and so forth. So of course comes the end of the 6 weeks, I would be fired too, because I'm not a union guy.
Sure.
I'm not even officially in the
citizen.
country, so certainly not union. So this was the basic situation I found myself in. And so at the end of the 6 weeks, I managed to get everything fixed, and I used to come in at 5 o'clock at night and keep on working until I'd done and undoing all the stuff that they'd done during the day, and it became like a cat and mouse game. Who breaks that? I come in and find it, fix it. Next morning they come back.
Break it again.
It's fixed. Oh no, they knew they had to break something else, so they'd do something, and you'd be surprised what they got up to. Unbelievable stuff. In one case, they took the head block off of an 8-track machine, and they undid the head block, and then they put a piece of metal, 1/4-inch thick metal, under one side of it, screwed it down again, so the whole head block was like this. So you were going through, if you were trying to record on track 7, you would record on track 7, but it would play back on track 6. And everything, it was like crazy.
Nobody knew for all the mixes.
It took me a while to find that, and then I came in and found this thing, and I took the thing out, and everything was fixed.
But it was booby trapped. So
the whole idea was they were trying to scotch the deal.
Hold on to their jobs.
Well, it didn't happen. So I'm afraid I was the cause of a lot of engineers losing their jobs at that time.
You kept fixing stuff, right?
Yeah, but when I finally got to the end of that, Chris Stone, who was the president of the record plant at the time, Chris Stone said, "Okay, well, you've done a fantastic job, Malcolm. Here's the paperwork. I've signed it now. This is your sponsored paperwork, and then I'm going to sign this other thing." And he gave me a $5,000 bonus check.
Wow!
And he also gave me a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper, it said, 3:15 West 57th Street, Bob Walters. And he handed me this thing. And he said, go to this address, ask for this man, tell him that I said he needs you. So I go, okay, now I've never done anything like this in my life before. I've been very fortunate in the work has always come to me. I've never had to go look for it. And in England, you know, it's an island culture, so you're known from a very early age if you've got the promise, everybody. So I never had to look for work as bass player, I never had to look for work as nothing. It came to me.
Yeah.
So this is the first time I'm going out and I'm trying to get a job. And I feel a little bit strange about it, but I think, hey, I'll try it. So I go to 350 and it's like this big church door. And I go in and I see media sound, and I thought, oh, this is a recording studio. And I walk down and I go to the receptionist and I say, excuse me, I'd like to see Bob Walters, please. Now, he's the president of the company, right? You don't just walk in the door as a stranger and say, I want to see the president. Oh, what do you want to see? What is your business? I said, well, Chris Stone said to tell Bob Walters that he needs me. So the girl on the desk didn't know, I could be a client. I could be anything, you know, she doesn't know. So she's very polite. So she calls up and says, excuse me, Mr. Walters, there's a man here, puts me on the phone. I said, so what's it about? I said, well, I have, I was told to tell you that Chris Stone from the record plant told me, believes that you need me. You know, he told me to tell you, you need me. What do you do? I said, I'm a technical engineer. I fix things. And so I go, come on up. So I go up to his office. He calls in his chief engineer. And to cut a long story short, he started interviewing me. And I had a little tool case with me with a magnetometer in it. I'd learned about magnetometers from Ampex. I've been on a course in Ampex to find it. They had the 16-track machine, Master Muncher, the MM1000. Okay. We called it the Master Muncher. And very interesting little machine, big machine. It was a converted video machine, 2-inch tape. And there was only 1-inch machines in New York at that time. And I'd put the first 16-track studio with an MM1000 in for Pat Boone. That was the first one in LA. So now in New York I have found out that this, you know, about this is the device called a magnetometer. Now, when you line up a tape machine, one of the first things that you have to know is whether or not the heads are magnetized. Because if the heads are magnetized and you put a tape on it, it can erase them. Mm-hmm. So we have a tradition to demagnetize the head. Sure. And the problem is when you demagnetize the heads, it's a hand thing, and it's a technique. And if you don't do it right, you can leave the heads more magnetized than they were when you started.
I remember doing that, yeah.
So, and it's very common fault, and so it's a very dangerous procedure. But if you have a magnetometer, you can put it at the heads, and if it deflects, then they're magnetized. Now you need to demagnetize it. It doesn't deflect. You need something to tell you, is it magnetized or not? Nothing else will tell you.
You got a base.
So, and it's a meter with no leads. It's magnet. It's just a round meter, and it deflects. So I open up my case, and I made this Sony mic case. I lined it with some sponge rubber, and I'd cut out for all my tools, my tweezers, my small wrenches, and all the little special tools that I use to align machines and do my maintenance work. And this thing's in the middle. So this Fred Porter, the chief engineer, says, okay, is that a microphone you bought there?
Yeah.
I said, no, it's my tool case. And I opened it up, and he looks at the meter and he says, what's that? I said, tables were turned. It was like, you don't know what that is?
Sure.
You don't have one of these? He says, no, what is it? I said, it's a magnetometer. And he says, well, what do you use it for? I said, well, what do you do when you align a tape machine? Now I'm interviewing him.
Right, yeah. I thought everyone had these.
Yes.
That's
what do you do? What do you do when you align the tape machine? He said, well, the first thing I do is demagnetize it and clean the heads. I said, well, wait a minute. How do you know the heads need demagnetizing? He said, well, it's just routine. You always demagnetize. I said, no, if you don't do it right, you can magnetize it. Just
reverse the procedure,
So he's like, well, I said, no, you have to have one of these. I'm surprised that you don't have this. This is basic basic
Basic
technology.
state-of-the-art tool, yeah.
Well, Bob Walters had heard enough. He turns and says, "Okay, Fred, you can leave us now. Thank you very much." And he turns around to me, as soon as Fred's got it, he said, "Would you like the job of chief engineer here?" Now, I've just been responsible for firing maybe 10 people.
Right, yeah.
I don't want to fire nobody else. I got my green card going in. I don't need any trouble. I don't need anybody reporting me for firing,
Right.
and not being a, you know.
Sure.
So I'm diplomatic as well. I've learned to do that. The BBC trained me as a producer, and diplomacy is a very important part of that. So I said, well, you know, what about Fred? You know, and he was one of these 9-to-5ers with the pocket protector and the whole thing. He wasn't really, because Media Sound was serviced the advertising, Madison Avenue advertising. Okay. They had sessions, strings for an hour, horns for an hour, percussion for an hour, and so on. So this was the general situation there. They weren't a recording studio for records, but they wanted to be. And so because I'd been at the record plant, obviously I knew about that side of things. So Bob Walters said to me, well, look, you know, why don't we let Fred be the stay on in chief engineer position, and you become the chief engineer at night. After 5 o'clock, after Fred leaves, you take over, okay? And that way we don't have to fire him. And he does good work and so on and so forth. He's just a pretty straight guy.
Right.
And he can't keep up with it here. And he has no vision about what to do to bring record business in. I said, well, I know what to do. We'll put a 16-track studio in down in the basement. And he was like, okay, this is all cool. So I get the job. So I go downstairs, and my first day, Monday, I go in, and I'm working in the studio there, and I go into Studio A, which is in a converted church, much like the building next door here, and with a control room much like that built into the room there, and an ISO booth next to it. That was the extent of it. And in the ISO booth is this strange-looking contraption that I don't recognize. I've never seen one in my life before. And I'm servicing the board, and I ask about this thing. And does this belong to the studio? No, this doesn't belong to the studio. This belongs to a guy called Bob Margouleff. He's the Mogist in residence. I said, Mogist in residence? What is that? He says, well, you know, sometimes in the ads, what they want is they need sound effects and things like that. You know, like Ford Torino.
Yeah.
Right.
So this was what Bob was doing, because at that time the synthesizer was not accurate enough. There were problems technologically with it.
Right.
The tuning was off. It was not touch sensitive. It wasn't polyphonic. There were lots of reasons why musicians weren't using it.
Yeah.
And so
Going
it was being used as a sound effects machine.
Sci-fi movies and.
But you see, I didn't know this at the time. So I'm looking at this thing, and I'm looking at it. Voltage-controlled oscillators. Gee, I know all about voltage control. I learned about that in the service. I had a voltage-controlled plotting table in one of the RAF stations that I worked at, and it was like, okay, I understand voltage-controlled oscillator. I didn't know you could do that, but that's great. Voltage-controlled filter. I know what a filter is. That's great. Voltage control. Interesting.
And you see a keyboard, and
I see a keyboard.
You're a piano player for years at this point. Yeah.
And I look at the. I look at this other thing, and then I see these things. It says envelope generator. I thought, wow, this thing can actually make envelopes?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, wow, this is really an interesting one. I'm looking around, see where you put the paper.
Right, yeah.
And then envelope follower. What, this thing follow the mailman? What's going on here? I don't get it. You know? Voltage controlled amplifier, well, okay, I can understand that, but why would you want a voltage control and amplifier? I don't get this. You know?
Cut off.
And then
what are they cutting?
What is the sequencer thing? And there's lots of knobs on it, and there's another thing called interface. I'm going, I don't get this. But worst of all, the whole thing where the on-off switch is an ignition switch, like a car.
Oh, wow.
And no key in it. Now, you know, I can go around the back hot wiring.
Right.
Sure. But number one, I'm told it doesn't belong to the studio. And number two, if somebody's gone to the trouble to put an ignition switch on it, they don't want you hot wiring it, clearly. So I just thought, patience, Malcolm. Eventually, the person who put on that switch, the person who has the switch, will show up eventually. And I was warned by all the other engineers, oh, this guy who owns that, he's a weird guy, nobody likes him, blah, blah, blah. So what they had done is they had only shown him how he wasn't really much of an engineer. He had bought the Moog because he had done a movie and he needed the soundtrack for it, and he thought he could do it. This is Robert. And he thought he could do the soundtrack with it. It turned out a little bit more difficult than he thought, so he was left with this instrument that he had to pay for, and he bought it on loan. He took taken out bank loan, and he was paying off for this thing. It was like what, 12,000-15,000. I don't know. It was a Moog 3C.
At that point, yeah.
So that was about the price of them. I think between 10 and 12, 15 grand back then. Wow. And which was big money back then, 1970, 1968 and 70. So I see this strange thing, and I wait. It's 5 days before 11 o'clock at night. See, remember, I'm still working nights.
Working nights,
so
yeah.
11 o'clock Friday night. In walks this guy with hair down to his rear end, wearing a fur coat down to his ankles. It was winter. I found out later his father was a furrier. That's why I had the fur coat. Okay. But it was a very good fur coat. I recognise good fur. My mother used to have a thing about furs. So anyhow, he walks in, and I look at him, and he looks at me, and I think, this must be Bob Margoliouth. And he looks at me, and he goes, he told me later, he thinks, this must be that new British engineer that I've been hearing about. So he says to me, oh, hi, my name is Bob Margoliouth. Who are you? And I said, oh, my name is Malcolm Cecil, and I'm the new tech here. I'm doing the maintenance work. And the engineers had shown Bob how to record, because that's what he had to do, doing his Moogfest things for the advertising things. But they hadn't shown him how to overdub and play back, because in those days the board was either in record or remix. And nobody had shown him there was a switch and what happened when you switched it, how things changed and so on and so on. So he says to me, tell me, do you know how to run this board and record? I said, I better, I have to fix it. And I said to him, do you know how to run that thing? He said, I'd better, I own it. I said to him, well, I'll tell you what,
meeting.
I will show you how to run this if you show me how to run that. He sticks out his hand and says, deal.
Oh.
So we went into the room there. I got a tape out. We put the tape up, and it was a 1-inch tape, and it was like 27 minutes of tape. So, per track. So we put the tape up, we put it in record. Bob knows how to do that. So, and we start experimenting. Now, I don't know if you've heard the Wall record,
the Wonderwall, the George Harrison, right?
Yeah,
we were talking about that.
George told me.
Sure.
I worked with George on as part of an album I did with Dave Mason from Traffic.
Oh, sure.
I did an album with him, and George was one of the guest artists. We spent 3 days together, sitting next to each other at the console.
George Harrison.
So
from the Beatles,
George, I got a chance to talk to him about it, and I asked him about this. This was later, much later, many years later. I said to him, this Wonderwall record, what was it about? How did you come to make that? He says, oh, well, actually, that was just like Paul Beaver, who was the representative for Moog in LA, was showing me how the thing worked, and I just recorded it, and then I went back and I did a few things, and it wasn't really a serious musical thing. It was just some experimental sounds. I was just messing around, and mainly it was Paul Beaver messing around, showing me the stuff. And he was quite straight about it, So he was like very nonchalant about, we didn't know what we were doing. That was it. So that was exactly what our first 27 minutes of recording sounded like. We were getting things in tune, we were turning things around, getting sounds and so on and so on. Robert's doing all these things, and I'm watching and so and learning. And so, to cut a long story short, we ended up, that became our first piece of music. It became Aurora on.
Really?
Originally 27 minutes of this, and then the thing that I'd been taught at the BBC when I got too sick to play with the radio orchestra, and they wanted to keep me because I was the youngest principal they'd ever had by far. I was 27. The next youngest was like mid-40s, and they didn't want to lose me, and so they officially should have fired me after 3 months of sick leave, but they transferred me over and trained me as a producer, and because I'd had 4 years of serving Her Majesty, because the BBC is the British Broadcasting Corporation, chartered to the Queen, so my 4 years experience counted, and I was able to become trained as a producer if I had 6 weeks of familiarization, and the 6 weeks of familiarization that they trained me was tape editing.
I'll take it.
So I went into the 27 minutes got edited down to 7 minutes.
Sure.
Which is what Aurora is. It's
Right,
the 7
on the
minutes. 7
record.
minutes of good stuff out of that first 27 minutes.
So
So that was how I started with Bob. And Bob and I, what happened was, within a week, Bob had turned around to me and said, "Listen, man, I'll make you a 50% partner in this. Let's just." We weren't making an album. We were not trying to do anything. I was trying to create things. I had been working with John McLaughlin doing things in 21/8 that the drummers couldn't rock. Wow. But John and I just played these things because we felt them. Mm-hmm. And then trying to explain them to other people was really difficult. So we ended up doing the Edinburgh Festival one year, and we did this thing in 21/8. But he was the only musician in England that that I could communicate with, that could do it. And we couldn't do everything. And also the new sounds were really interesting to me, these unusual sounds. So I decided that this would be a very good thing to make this instrument playable. One of the problems was that you couldn't keep the damn thing in tune.
Right.
It would drift. Once you got into it, would drift, number one. Number two, you couldn't keep it in tune for more than 2 octaves. And there were all sorts of problems, which I eventually solved. That's why we built Tonto, was to solve the problems.
Just go in a whole other direction, yeah.
Yeah, and so eventually, that was the basic, first meeting with it. So Bob was saying to me, "Okay, I'll make you a 50% partner." You see, well, I didn't realize at the time what that meant was we were going to take out a loan together. He was going to take the money back. And now I was 50% responsible for playing back
for the whole thing.
For the Moog, right? So I'm immediately $6 or $7 grand in debt.
Yeah, right away.
Right away.
But that first jam, that first night became the track Aurora.
That was the
right off the bat. You hit
right
record. You just said, let's.
Yeah, and I showed him how to play back. We did overdubbing. For the first time, he was able to put more than one line. Because all they ever needed was a those sort of things, musical sound effects.
Absolutely, yeah.
And here we are trying to make music. Now, the first Moogs were not touch sensitive. They were not polyphonic. Right. They were like back to the days of the organ or the harpsichord, Bach, the Baroque period.
Yeah.
And that's why Switched On Bach worked. As the music, because that was Baroque music. It was written for instruments that did not have touch sensitivity. Yeah. There were no pianos. Piano wasn't invented until much later. And Beethoven was the pianist, and that's what changed them from Baroque to, Haydn was the first one to go into the classical official. I mean, we talk about classic music, but there's Baroque was before classic. Then there's classics. It was only 50 years. There was Haydn, there was Mozart, there was Beethoven. Sure. And Beethoven was deaf, so he expanded the orchestras because he couldn't hear.
At some point, he became
from
deaf.
36 people to 108.
And
that's what he's famous for. That's why everybody touts him as he's greater than Mozart. Now, Mozart musically was brilliant. The guy wrote stuff straight out of his head. You look at Beethoven's scores, there's scribblings, crossings. It was tough for him.
He worked at it, but
but what it came out with was beautiful.
Right.
And he bridged the gap from Baroque to romantic music. Yeah. And so the 50s, he was the last of the classical composers. Mozart was in the middle. There was Haydn, Mozart, and then there was Beethoven.
That's right. And Haydn taught them both, I think. He taught Mozart at least.
Yeah, he taught Mozart, yeah.
I can't remember if he taught Beethoven.
Mozart studied with everybody.
Yeah,
Mozart was the movie Amadeus really catches the essence of who he was, in my opinion. Bit of a crazy guy, after my own heart.
Well, what a fantastic story, because that really brings home, and I think, again, as we spoke about, we're going to ask some questions that don't usually get asked, and that's a great, because sometimes you hear some of the other details of who you produced and who you recorded with. Yeah. I think a lot of that info is out there already, but I think today this is great to kind of hear, well, how did you get from point A to point B to point C? Man. And of course, you mentioned these synthesizers being monophonic. Obviously, that was your inspiration to go ahead and come up with a polyphonic synthesizer. And so I want to come back in a minute to that moment too, and going ahead with Stevie. But I want to ask Robert here, because of course Robert is younger and listening to some of this music that's about to happen. But let's kind of bridge the gap there, and right after that, of course, you and Robert are doing things with Stevie Wonder a few years later. But let's jump over and ask Robert here. Obviously, you heard those records, and tell me a little bit about where your head was at around 1970, 71, 72. The Stevie Wonder records are coming out, the records that we mentioned before, and this music's happening with this gentleman and with Robert providing the
making
synthesis.
all the synth stuff.
Yeah, Stevie. A lot of people forget, too, that Stevie, 1970, 71, 72, he's already a musician with records out for 10 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
People always forget that. Like, he's a veteran.
Yes.
Talk to us about that. You're getting into music, playing bass in early 70s.
In the early 70s. Now I'll say I played with, I started out, basically making my own groups and things like that and playing around, learning how to play cover tunes. And I'm not a formally trained musician. So I learned everything like the old school way off the records. And
coming up in D.C., right? You're
in Washington, D.C.
Right?
And my favorite musician that I never heard, but I heard about, that inspired me to really want to carry on without no training, was the keyboard player, my mother's favorite. Wow, he's a real old dude.
I'll never forget what's his name.
No, what's his name? The guy from he's way before my time, but I only heard about him, and my mother told me about him.
She had the records. Okay.
No.
What is he?
Let me think of this
What
guy's
style
name.
was he? Jazz?
Jazz, total jazz.
Okay.
Like in my mother's
Art
time.
Tatum?
No, he doesn't read music.
Oh, Earl Garner.
Earl Garner. So
right.
my mom tells me about Earl Garner, and of course, we were too poor to afford any kind of lessons or instruments or anything.
Sure.
But I say I would like to play, and I had a little guitar my uncle got me, had 4 strings on it. So I said I want to be a musician. She said, but I don't know how I'm going to be able to do it because I won't be able to get trained, right?
Right.
So she says, well, Earl Garner didn't read music. If you believe you can do it, do it.
Wow.
So from there in the basement to a guy named Ricky Holmes, who studied under that bassist I told you about earlier, from Eddie Kendrick's group, Bernard Miles. So from there to studying under Ricky Holmes to joining a Motown group, my first group, they were the Dynamic Superiors, signed to Motown, produced by Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson and Holland Dozier Holland and all those people. So we traveled around, and I came in really early, myself and Gil's guitarist, Ed Brady.
Okay.
So we come in as like, well, he had been in it longer than me because he was like at 12 on the road.
Right.
So I come in at 16, but he's older than me. So we traveled with the Superiors all around from 75 till we joined Gil in 79.
Okay.
So Malcolm's been here 10 years now that I hear the story, or 11 or so in America. In 79, I'm 20. I meet my mentor that he doesn't know he's my mentor because I'm already with Gil, who's my mentor too.
Right.
So he just discovers he's been, well, he knows, but he's just discovering, I've been mentoring this guy the whole time, and I've taught you well.
So you guys met in 79.
79.
Okay.
Yep.
That's and you had already done a record or two with Gil, but you talk about that moment.
Okay,
the meeting,
we come
kind
out
of
there,
the first,
and you see, you heard about synthesizers. You already know about those albums that they did and all the bass sounds. Now, we're not talking about all the. We're talking about
the bass.
Yeah. You're like, okay, how did they do this or whatever? And you've heard many Moogs.
Yeah.
But you heard about Malcolm and Brian also, and Brian is becoming like a Stevie or something on this synthesizer.
Brian
thing.
Jackson.
Yeah, Brian Jackson.
For people,
And so we're going to cut the album, but Brian's not in the band anymore.
Right.
So we're out there with Gil. I meet Malcolm at 20. Now this is to his teaching. He taught me this at 20. He's hustling around behind me. It's one of the first records I would play on that people would actually hear. The stuff we did on Motown, they kept, changed the names, did whatever, and we were young guys just taking our beating. Malcolm would run around behind us young guys like as if we were Stanley Clarke or somebody like that. That taught me humility, day one. This is what I walked into. Tonto and a guy so humble that you could not possibly believe. The sounds he was getting out of the studio and everything that we wanted or you could dream of.
Sure.
He could pull it out. All the stuff for Brady, which meant that the bass was going to get treated right. Now I find out he's a bassist and he pulls out a 250-year-old bass. Then, in 79, it was 250. Wow. I'll never forget it. And he had a 150-year-old one he promised me that I hope I still can get. So we go on, and Malcolm is just like once this is the truth because Brian's not there, Tonto's not. We're in Tonto, recording in Tonto, using it for whatever, like click tracks and stuff. In '79,
Right.
you know, loops a couple years after that. Like the first loop I ever heard, Tonto, that on anything. I've been in hip hop because I was the baby out of the Midnight Band and Amnesia Express, and Gil's groups. You know,
You
the
were
two
young
groups,
one, yeah.
the two well-known groups that Gil Scott-Heron had. So we're doing things that don't exist. Malcolm's teaching us things that I tell him now about, and he's kind of like, "Wow, you remember all those things that I actually taught y'all, like how to time a band on the verses with a stopwatch, because how do you know how to stay in timing? And if you listen to all the records from before, not the ones he's producing or working with, because they're probably all steady." But all the records everybody else made, you can hear it if you put it on a stopwatch because it didn't. Nobody
true.
got steady till we digitized ourselves, and we had the total human feel back then. Another lesson,
Right.
okay? Stay with the human feel, and you could recognize a second or so is what makes it all unique, you know. Because there was times where we were about 5 or 6 seconds off, and do it again. There he is, right there. Do it
And
again.
he's just coming out of the jazz,
Yeah.
years in England and London and being one of the rhythm section. It's all starting to make sense now. And again, learning the background of you gentlemen. I mean, a lot of people, again, they know the main history that's out there. But this is like lifting the hood and like, wait, how did you come to that idea? Well, Gil Scott-Heron, again, what a loss. We spoke about this the other day. I mean, it's
tragic.
It's beyond words. I mean, because, and I want to thank you gentlemen again for all the people, all the fans that are watching, and the people that, if you're watching, you're hardcore because this is, we're going into some stuff here. But want to thank you both too for your dedication to the art, because between you, when you look at the discography, you look at the things you did together, the Gil Scott-Heron records that are history lessons, each one of them.
Absolutely.
The politics, the musical stuff, because the funk and the Motown and the R&B and the blues messages that are in each of those tunes. And it all makes so much sense hearing your backgrounds and knowing that, a few years earlier, Malcolm and Robert had just created the whole thing with all the Stevie records. I mean, the template for 70s funk.
Well, see, I didn't work on any of the Stevie records.
Oh, I know you didn't. Yeah, but you were listening
Malcolm,
to them.
Yes,
you were working
to
on
him,
them in your
Malcolm
bedroom.
And Malcolm was able to say things to us as young musicians, especially me and Brady. He would do things for us like this. We aspired to be like Stanley, Mingus, and him. He's my Mingus. This is my mentor for the rest of my life. Okay, in all the areas. I've become an engineer. I've become a producer. Gil is part of that too, because they were the producers, and they didn't just hold it back from us. Anybody that say they didn't have a fair shot in Gil's group, that's not true. He let us do everything, put us before him.
Yes.
So this is the true story. Okay, there's time where he didn't eat and so on, but we did. I know because I was there since the baby of the first baby of the first band, and the last man standing in any of the bands. So there's no question. I know who cared about what and who he cared about. And he cared about us all.
Right.
In a way like a father, brother, mentor, and anything else you needed. Anything else you want to talk about? That ain't real.
He was a magnificent human being. Magnificent.
The words speak for themselves. He could have said anything he wanted on the record and could have sold you butt shaking and anything else. But he showed you what you needed and he sold you what you needed, or they sold you from his collections the things that he only worked on, which is positive, the future, work for peace, all those different things. And he never changed it up, never quit to the end. People would wonder, why would he say the same things over and over again, which is why we have to carry on with those words. You don't need to fix nothing that's broke. It's not broke, right? It's the words are what they are, and there's nothing better to be said.
Sure.
So
now, what a beautiful. That's a great statement. What you just said. Thank you, man. That was. No, he. And I want people who, if you don't know Gil Scott-Heron, other than a couple of the hits, as it were, there was a couple of hits, but please dig deep. And what's amazing too, and I always say this, him and Frank Zappa were kind of coming from the same direction, where they somehow found a way to combine music, the political statements, the social statements. I think Gil went further into American history, African American history, bluesology, all these
The
things.
jails, the this, the everything, the moon, the space shuttle, the
NASA,
Reagan, the
Reagan.
presidents,
Well, that's
the
what I was gonna say.
congressmen, the mayors,
Yeah.
nuclear power.
Yeah.
It's prophetic. I mean, the stuff he was talking about and that you guys recorded 30 years ago, it's all coming true. I mean, as we look at, as we move into
And South
kind of
Africa,
a
Africa
theocracy.
before it was trendy.
Yep.
Remember when
yeah,
everybody jumped on the
Johannesburg.
wagon?
No one knew. People thought that was. So do some homework there, folks. If you don't know, Gil Scott-Heron, dig deep. A lot of people know Stevie Wonder, know the hits. Now you know this is the gentleman programming those Moog basses on some of those things. I want to talk about that for just a minute, the musical thing. I mean, and if you have friends that are bass players, make sure they watch this because you know, there's so much. I'm gonna say most of the bass in all of, you know, starting from 1970, the things that became the template bass lines, the funk lines in all of the music we know, you know, between you starting it out on the synthesizer and then the important records that you played on.
Yep.
Wow, the bass energy in this room. I mean, let's look at some specifics for a minute. I mean, you think about the Moog bass line on Too High.
Oh yes.
Oh my God. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, the
We all know it
thousands,
by heart.
the thousands of tracks that rip that off.
Oh yeah.
And here's the man. Just talk for just a minute about that, just that one track, for instance, the Moog
The
bass,
sound
and
too,
you
please,
walked
for
in.
me, because I know I have to, see, I need to know about how you got that sound.
And we're gonna wrap
we
up
got-
with.
hold on,
We're just gonna
Scott,
wrap
talk
up with a
about
couple of
Angel
these
Dust.
things.
The bass
well,
sound he
well, that
made
was
on-
my next thing. Thank you.
Gosh, I could kill him.
You're next. You're up next. But we're gonna wrap up a little bit, but with some musical things. Tell us about Too High and your memories of
Yeah.
that
Well,
Moog
Too
bass.
High. Stevie and I, we used to have some interesting conversations because Stevie, being unsighted, he had his own unique way of playing. He played what sort of flat-fingered, and he used his thumbs to find where he was on the edge of the keyboard. So he played predominantly on the black notes. And I used to tell him, "Hey, Stevie, you're prejudiced." So basically, his response to that was, you know, well, hey man, you know, this is easier for me. But so I said to him, well, you know, you're building chords all the time in thirds, piled up thirds. It's not the only way to do it, because I've been studying arranging since I was 15. And I said to him, there's a guy called Gil Evans and Bill Evans, who are not the same guy, and they're not the
Right.
same family even, but they're
Right.
both called the same Evans. Bill Evans being the pianist, the jazz pianist, who built chords in fourths and flat and fifths. They didn't use thirds, and it gives an entirely different sound. It's an entirely different way of so. And I said like this, and you can move around in different keys. And I was going, and I was showing him chromatically the fourth things. And he said, hey man, let me try. And he sits down and he goes.
Wow.
Hey man, we got to get the girls to sing this.
Yeah.
I said, great idea. So we got the Wonder Love singers, the girls, Lonnie Groves,
Sure.
and,
Tasha Thomas.
Tasha
Yeah.
Thomas, and Shirley.
Is it Serena?
Was it Serena? No. Okay.
Anyway,
no, okay.
they came
Who's the
and he
third?
taught, and they did the thing as a vocal thing.
Yeah.
And the idea was about Too High. The whole idea is an anti-drug song.
Right.
Now,
Sure.
Gil did an anti-drug song, Angel
Sure.
Dust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, the difference between Gil and Stevie is Gil was a doctor of English literature. Yeah. He actually taught at Johns Hopkins. He was
Sure.
a professor there. He studied at Lincoln University. That's where he met Brian Jackson. Was at Lincoln.
John Hopkins.
Yeah.
Taught at Federal City College in D.C.
Right. There you go. So
Yeah.
the
A
man
true
has the
professor.
accurate
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
A true professor, a wordsmith par excellence, with a rapier-like tongue and wit. You could never get the better of him in word games.
No,
I play word games and
Never.
puns and things. You could never win with Gil.
English
Gil
telling
would
you that
just
now.
zap you down. He just
Monster.
he was an absolute, and his mind, poof, quick.
Oh, just
We used to have a lot of fun together, playing with puns and things, and
Yeah.
he would take things and turn them on, turn them around, and it was hilarious. We used to have a great deal of fun. But Gil had this ability. he was quite willing to name names, places.
Yeah.
Stevie, on the other hand, was much more general.
Sure,
Okay?
sure. Kept
you
it
ta- you,
open,
ta- you
yeah.
take, your name is Big Brother. You say you're watching me on the telly. Well, that's after I've been reading Stevie, Big Brother, and George Orwell's
Right.
1984, excerpts from 1984, but the whole of Animal Farm.
Oh, wow.
And so he came up with this idea, for this song. And when he came in, it was like, I got this new song. I said, yeah, Stevie, another bloody love song, sure.
Right.
Just roll the tape, man.
Wow. But you just
That
dropped
was a different song.
That's a different song, but you just dropped a real heavy thought that I never thought of. You're also the dude who read some stuff to Stevie Wonder, because of course it's obvious someone is reading him things. This is before we had talking books, as it were, which is one of his. But no, that's but that song again. It's amazing to hear where the harmonic structure came, and then you just added the bass. You just decided.
The first thing we ever do with Stevie, with the exception of Superstition, every other song started with a keyboard and Stevie's voice.
Okay.
Even if he was just going la 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 la,
Right.
very superstitious, la 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 la, very superstitious, la 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 la,
Yeah.
la 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 la. We didn't have the hook at the beginning.
Right.
And a lot of the hooks came out of just kibitzing backwards and forwards. Hey man, we need a hook. How about when you believe in things you don't understand, you can suffer. Superstition ain't the way. Well, the hook is not superstition ain't the way. The hook is when you believe in things you don't understand,
Right.
you can suffer.
Yeah,
And that's the real key thing, and that was where the big change places. Now, who wrote that line? I don't know who it was. Stevie gets the credit because it's his song.
Yeah.
But we talked about it, and to get the words for Superstition, I had to lock him in because it was written for Jeff Beck. I don't know if you know that story.
Right.
And Jeff was going back to England the following day, and I needed to get the vocal down. We didn't have any words, and I locked Stevie in the room. When he came in, I rotated him around 50 to backwards and forwards to disorient him.
Wow.
And I shoved him, instead of going in the studio, I shoved him in the production room, which was opposite the studio, with my secretary, Katie, who was 140 IQ, Mensa. She'd do the London Times, Sunday Times crossword in half an hour. Which is remarkable. She was an amazing lady, and she's very, very literate. And Stevie, however, was not a lyricist, and so you get these lyrics. I locked him in there and said, "You're not coming out until I get the lyrics."
Finish the song, yeah.
I'm not even opening the door. You have to slide them under the door to me. It was one of those things. And it took him all afternoon to do this. And Katie was in there. Now, how much Katie wrote, I don't know, but we came out 13-month-old baby, broke the looking glass, 7 years of bad luck, good things in the past. What the hell's that mean? It's just a bunch of nonsense.
And everybody got it, though, as soon as it came out.
Right. It's a little Dolly-esque, but it works. No, that's an amazing story. I mean, again, what's beautiful, guys, is, again, as we wrap up, we want you to come back to Asheville. We want you to come back and do...
Yeah, but before you go,
you
gotta let him tell... He's going to tell the Angel Dust story.
Okay, I'm going to come back.
Because I just want to know, how was that bass sound
bass
created?
sound,
When there's I know it's a fretlessy type thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Sure.
But now, I'm just going to say this small part. Can you
then I'll
imagine
reintroduce it.
getting ready to play this bass line and you actually think it's a bass?
Right.
And you're like, how do you create this sound?
Yeah.
Because it sounds exactly like everybody, all the bass players, all of us thought this is a Gil's bass player.
Right.
I didn't play on that record. That's Brian on the synth, and Malcolm doing what he did with Stevie with the sound.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out which was a problem, because I forever gave Brian credit until I understood later. So I'm like, oh, no wonder you used to laugh when I used to go, I hate you for that bass line. No wonder you used to laugh, because I'm going, Malcolm done made some kind of tone that when I saw them on Soul Train, and Brady's in the band, I'm going to join the band in 2 months now. And I'm going, the guy's miming, but in 79 and 8, you don't know, you ain't thinking like Flea and them last time on the awards, at the Super Bowl. You're not, nobody calls you and say, they wasn't playing right there.
Right.
Man, they was on there, and I was like, Gil was known for always having, like, I'm not miming. So he was live, I think, or something, and the rest, he refused to mime. So he was live. And the bass player's doing the mime thing with that tone. So you know what I felt? Total hate for all of y'all. And I'm joining the thing. I gotta play this. And the dude's doing the fun thing with it. So I'm like, gosh, he's leaving the band? I'm not gonna get the sound.
Right.
This don't even, I don't
Yeah,
know what
there's
bass
no
is
string
this.
instrument, right.
You know this. You can't even hum that one.
Right.
How you do it?
What? Yeah. Tell us about the Angel Dust bass sound.
I know it's Tonto.
Robbie, I know I'm your mentor and everything, but I could tell you. But if I do,
I gotta kill you.
I have to kill you. Yes. The classic.
Well, grasshopper
and I
will
don't
die,
want to
ladies
do
and
that.
gentlemen.
So,
That's I wasn't sure who played it on the record. I mean, I've seen you play it live a few times.
Yeah.
You did a damn good job. I mean,
Well, see,
you
that's
know,
what I'm
it's,
saying. That punishment from that made me be able to try to. Now, that's something he
Capture.
told me about Reggie. That I
Right.
want to say about that. It's an honor for you to say that about the electric. Reggie, how he's the only one that played those bass lines.
Yeah.
Because you knew what
Reggie
they
was the
really
one.
sound like.
yeah.
And he was the only one that could make them sound like what Stevie had done on a bass without all. You know, you don't have Tonto behind you.
Right.
So I appreciate that because, man, to try to create that sound, even though it was a fretless sound, I'm playing fretted. I
Sure.
don't even have a fretless yet because I was playing in an R&B group.
Right.
Fretless came later and all that.
Well-
On Is That Jazz, which he had me sound
Oh,
great on.
geez. No, what a great track. No, again, we have to do this again because
Yeah.
you gentlemen, we scratched the surface today.
Oh, this gonna be a long one.
The great records that we have to talk about. I mean, just to do your research, folks. We got a lot of scholars who watch this show, but go punch in YouTube. Gil Scott-Heron, Angel Dust live, and because you always used to feature Robert on that song. And,
Secretary of Entertainment,
in fact,
Brother
when-
Robert G is the man to see about the RSVP.
Yes.
On the party, but no Angel Dust
AD.
and no dipping because we
Boom,
got
boom.
the remix. Malcolm and I have the remix of the new Angel Dust for you new dippers. We got it
That's
coming
right,
for
that's
you.
right.
So no dipping this summer and look out for the banging track, okay?
Well, when I walked up to you yesterday, I haven't seen you in 20 years. I walked right up, and once you were like, wait, I recognize.
Yeah.
Oh, Robert G, you know, and I
Yeah.
right away I said,
You know what
Dr.
I was
Robert
thinking
G
of?
is the man to see.
I was thinking,
on
he
the
looks
bottom.
like this guy I met in New York that said, hey, man, you sound really good. I'm a close friend of Marcus Miller. I'm going to tell him about you. You are in trouble. I was thinking, is that guy that was like made
Right,
Marcus
right,
go
that's-
that way?
Yeah. well, I'm
No,
gonna,
no, last story.
Oh, yeah.
So this
Okay.
guy said
we
that to
have
me.
a minute or two. Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
This
yeah.
guy said that to me, and I was thinking when I'm looking at you, because I knew I met you on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I'm going, is that guy? And I ain't want to say it to you now because you tell me about the tech stuff you're doing. I'm going, I bet you that's him. I won't remind him of that story. I'm going, not.
Right. Well, it's great to be adding you guys to our continuing series here because for me, and we talked about this the other day, and it was one of the places we met. I started out in kind of whether this is journalism or music history or musicology, whatever you want to call it, what I try to do. But as a young one, man, I was 20, 21, 20 or so. I interviewed Gil, and we were talking about this. I interviewed Gil for my college newspaper in Rutgers, Livingston College in Rutgers.
Right, when we was talking about the show.
Yeah, and I actually, we should maybe get a clip of it and put it up. I had a cover story
Yeah.
in the Livingston newspaper, 1985, 86. Gil came to the college,
Yeah.
and you and Ron Holloway
Yeah.
were hanging out, and we brought him, and I have a cassette somewhere.
Wow.
But it kind of funny. You guys have been driving all day, and Gil fell asleep like towards the end of the interview, and it's on the tape. Gil's like, and you hear Ron on the tape. Gil, hey Gil, man, huh? Oh, you know, but that's so it's kind of fun. Like all these years later, to still be in music, kind of journalism or whatever. But here we are on the internet doing it. So we'll do this again, and let's just the very last thing to touch on is today. We always bring it back to today. You gentlemen are playing tomorrow for Moogfest. You're doing some recording, so that'll be up on the web, and we'll link up to that performance so you can see what these guys are doing today. And tell us very quickly what's coming up the next few months. You're going to be recording, writing music.
Absolutely, both of those things.
Okay,
We're going
great.
to be recording. We did a concert 2 weeks ago at Columbia Green Community College.
Great.
With a
So we'll look online for that.
6 other musicians. There were 8 of us in total.
Great.
In total. And during that, we did this 2 bass thing, which really took off, and the people absolutely loved it. They
Great.
responded so positively to it that we said, "Wait a minute, there's something going on here." And my wife Polly is very critical lady. She's like, you know.
She's
That's
been
good.
through it all with us.
She's seen it all, done it all, and everything, and it's like, and she was like, this is good.
Wow.
This is good. You should carry on with this. This is really something
Great.
else. This is
God
special.
bless you, Polly. You know I love you for that. She's always been my
And it's upright
Thanks, big
bass and
sis.
electric bass and
Upright and
synthesizer
electric
bass.
bass, and
and
we've
synthesizers.
gone now. We can announce the upright is now MIDI. Sorry.
That's great. Yes. And we were talking about
Here we
that.
go.
with
yeah.
the help of the people from good people from the Moog Factory.
That's fantastic, and we're gonna come back and do a thing just on the tech that you
Yeah.
guys do.
Yeah.
Okay, and what's it called? What's the project called that people can Google? And
Well, we haven't got a title yet.
That's
but
a great
we have,
title. That's very strange.
Well, that was one of the things.
We said that.
But we came up. We went to see the
Last Night
Gaslight
Ghost,
Killer.
Yes.
okay.
And we were talking about the low end and everything
Yeah.
around it. And we came up with. Do we want to tell them what we came up with?
Okay. You have to promise to buy this, our first CD. Okay.
Yeah. Now we don't know whether it's the name of the group or the name of the CD, but or the name of a track. We haven't decided yet. But we came up. We sort of
It's a
borrowed
challenge.
a little
It's
bit
a challenge.
from Gaslight Killer, and we
Sure.
decided we were going to be Woofer Killer.
And we dare you to play our
Great.
CD.
Sure.
We dare you to play our
Killing the
CD.
woofers.
We're going to dare people to play our CD,
Dare.
and it'll
With
blow
your
their
money
woofers.
system.
That's great. No, that's okay.
Lord of the Lows, a la Stanley, and then with the tune.
And MalcolmCecil.com. People can find stuff. What's the
Actually,
website?
we're, at the moment, MalcolmCecil.com we could set up, but we're gonna come up with a proper thing. Right now, the active the active website is tontostudio.com.
Tonto Studio, right?
But
Okay.
we will post everything
Sure,
on that
on
website,
there, so people
but
can-
we will have our own website. I don't know. We've got to check whether Woofer Killer is available,
Right.
Right.
and we better do it before this goes out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Otherwise somebody
Won't
will have
matter
done
We
it.
can-
because
we
we
can
still
chop this
will
part
kill
out.
the woofer.
He just fun. Yeah, we can pop this, and then you and I had our first collaboration yesterday. Came up with, we were joking around, and what's the album title for because with the Moog thing, with Craig Leon, you're gonna do some Bach,
We're going
and
to do
it's-
21st century version of Switched on Bach.
and what was the name? We were joking around yesterday. 21st century, switched on Bach.
Switched on Bach,
21st
yeah.
century Switched on Bach. Because the
21st
first record
century,
that was,
switched on Bach.
the
love
It's
first,
the
the first
21st.
record that came out. See, it's the 50th anniversary of Bob Moog and Herb Deutsch coming up with the first synthesizer.
Right.
And then, but a few years later, of course, Walter, now Wendy Carlos,
Right.
did Switched on Bach. Now,
Right.
Switched on Bach works because it's Baroque music. Bach
Sure.
was Baroque music, and the organ and the harpsichord had no touch
Monophonic
sensitivity.
lines, right?
So and monophonic lines. So it works for
Really
the
does.
old style, original style mode. But now we've got a whole different set of things, a whole different set of parameters. Things have moved a tremendous amount in that 50 years, and we're going to be Craig Leon has spoken to Sony UK,
Right.
and they're 100% behind this.
Right.
And so tomorrow we're going to do the first taste of this.
Fantastic.
And
So
we're
we'll
getting
put a
together
link
with-
up for that. And Google Craig Leon, folks, if you don't know who that is. Another producer, produced all kinds of
Blondie,
bands.
Blondie,
And
Yeah,
Ramones.
Ramones.
He's a
Classic.
heavy.
So,
And a lovely guy. He's a classical composer and arranger,
right.
and he lives in England now, in Oxford, and he's a wonderful guy. And he and his lady Castle,
Right.
they're delightful people, and he's very he's very gung ho. He's like I said,
Let's do it.
and let's do it. Let's go, blah 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 blah. And he's it's going to be a pleasure to do this
We
project
can't wait.
with him.
We can't wait. We're gonna, and by then it'll happen. We'll link it up. We'll link up to the Moog site and stuff.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, it's been great. We're gonna wrap, but thank you so much. And again, welcome to Asheville. Welcome to
Thank you, man.
the Iamavl Asheville studios. Folks, we'll see you soon.